Well, good afternoon, almost good evening. It's almost cocktail time for everybody, but I want to say good afternoon to all of the fabulous multi-generational seroptimists of the Golden West region. And welcome to our workshop, Generational Differences and Common Grounds, where you're going to learn more about what shaped 4 different generations that make up our seroptimist membership, their differences and their similarities. We're going to have a little bit of fun along the way as we eavesdrop on a multi-generational committee meeting, and be prepared because you may recognize yourself and or your friends in the committee. Then the real work will start. We're going to work on the handout that I had sent you, and we're going to have some great conversations as we explore the generational differences and how it impacts your club. Now, what you're going to discover throughout our time together is that we truly do have more in common than we do differences. The first thing we have in common is that we're all seroptimists, right? And the second thing that we have in common is we all care very deeply about helping women and girls remove obstacles to their educational dreams and economic empowerment. That is a strong foundation to build upon. Now, to build our generational learning foundation, let's start by reviewing each of the 4 generations while we meet members of the Service Project and Funding Committee. Now, yes, I acknowledge there are 5 generations now, but we're going to focus on the 4 that currently make up the overwhelming majority of our seroptimist membership. And they are Traditionalists, born between 1900 and 1945, Boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. And in case you couldn't tell, I'm a boomer. Gen Xers, born between 1965 and 1980. And Gen Y, or Millennials, and we'll refer to them as Millennials, born between 1981 and 1999. Now, there are many different companies that specialize in generational training, and they may have slight adjustments to the start and end dates for each of these generations. But for the sake of our workshop and the conversations we're going to be having today, we're using the most commonly defined age groups for the generations. Now let's meet our generations, and I will add that the pandemic has created additional layers to what every generation has experienced. And we're going to start with our traditionalists. Now,
You're muted.
You're muted.
I unmuted myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Obviously, Robin already thought I was talking way too much, so she muted me and I had to unmute myself.
No, it was me. I was trying to mute someone else. Sorry.
No worries, no worries. See, that's part of the tech debt generation, which I'm not a part of. I wouldn't have even figured out how to have done that. All right, let's talk about traditionalists. Now, what I'm going to start sharing about each of the generations are general characteristics. These are not meant to label, to put people in a box, or to profile. These are generally accepted characteristics of each of the generations. Whoops, go back a slide. The traditionalists are generally characterized as being very hardworking, loyal, submissive, we'll talk about that in a minute, tech challenged generally, and traditional in their thought. Now, when I say submissive, I mean they're a generation that respects the position, even if they don't respect the individual in the position. So they may respect their boss, or they don't respect their boss. They may respect the position that their boss is in, or the CEO of a company, or a leader of an organization, because they're respecting the position, not the individual necessarily. And what happens is that can be seen as being submissive because maybe they don't push back on ideas that they don't believe in. Okay. Now, these are individuals that lived through, or their parents lived through, the Great Depression, and they worked extremely hard to hold on to what little they may have had. Now, research tells us that each generation is shaped by events that occurred when they were 10 years old. And so as you think of these characteristics, let's review a list of different events that happened over a span of time when a variety of traditionalists would have been 10 years old. And these are all US events that shape the traditionalist generation. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide now.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. The first one that we'll talk about is Prohibition, 1920. Now, if there is anybody here who doesn't know what Prohibition is, I'd encourage you to Google it and look it up. But basically, if you look at the list here, Prohibition happened in 1920, so there was no more fun to be had. Then the stock market crashed in 1929, which that was the start of the Great Depression. But then as we were coming back around, the Social Security Administration was formed in 1935. And what a coincidence that Alcoholics Anonymous was formed in 1935 when Prohibition was repealed. Now, War of the Worlds, the radio show, was done in 1938, and this was a radio show that everybody was glued to the radio, and people thought the show was actually happening in real life. So it was about an alien invasion, and people actually thought that's what was happening. Our traditionalists also experienced Pearl Harbor in 1941. They experienced a sitting president dying in 1956, so FDR. They experienced the polio epidemic in 1952. So now start to think about what's going on today and the pandemic that we're experiencing. And they also experienced the Supreme Court ruling that racial segregation was unconstitutional in 1954. So as you think about the characteristics and you think about these events, let's meet our traditionalist, and her name is Ethel. Now, Ethel is our committee chair of this Service Project and Funding Committee. Ethel was born in 1941. Yes, she is 80 years young. She worked as a legal secretary for over 25 years, and then she went back to school to earn her law degree at the age of 60. She is widowed with 3 children, 5 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Just ask Ethel and she'll tell you. Now, here are some fun facts. When she was 10, one of the top movies of 1959 or 51 was African Queen, and one of the top TV shows was Your Show of Shows. She's still a fan of singer Rosemary Clooney, and yes, that is George's aunt. All right, let's talk a little bit about the boomers. And boomers are characterized as being work-centric, very independent, goal-oriented, and competitive. And the reason why we're so stinking competitive is because too many of us were coming out of college at the same time and we were competing for too few jobs. They saw how hard their parents worked and they wanted more. This is the workaholic generation, and we're also referred to as the sandwich generation because they're now taking care of their traditionalist parents. Perhaps they're still taking care of their own children or their own grandchildren. They grew up at a time when there was much more social consciousness and the feminist movement was starting, and they just had a tendency to question more. Now, here are some things that were happening when the boomers were 10 years old. So we started the Great Space Race. So Sputnik 1 was put into orbit in 1957, followed by the Beatnik movement. And the reason why that's important to note is it began to shift what the traditionalists, so this is where you started to see traditionalists and boomers starting to be at odds with each other. JFK was assassinated in 1963. That same year, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream, the Watts riot in 1965, and then in 1968, Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated. Now, I draw your attention to these last few points that I talked about because as you think about what was going on in the 60s, this was civil rights. This was the start of the feminist movement, and here's the things that were playing out in the public's eye. As we did our own movement towards the space race, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon or walks on the moon in 1969. And then we had all of the protests and challenges and issues around Vietnam. That was in 1970. There were 4 students killed at Kent State by the National Guard. In 1972, the US troops leave Vietnam, and Nixon resigned in 1974. So as you can see, a lot of work around the social movements. Well, let's meet our boomer committee member, and her name is Rachel. Rachel was born in 1958, which makes her 62. Now, Rachel's just been laid off from her job due to a downsizing because of the pandemic. And she was a vice president of product development. And after a 30-year career, she says she's not quite ready to retire yet. So she's exploring other career-related opportunities. Rachel is divorced. She has 2 adult children. And her fun fact is that when she was 10 in 1968, the top movie was 2001: A Space Odyssey. And one of the top TV shows was Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Now, give me a hands up or a thumbs up or some type of a reaction if anybody here remembers Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Because that was key on our television set when I was about that age. She's a huge fan of the 60s and early 70s music, and her favorite song is Born to Be Wild by Steppenwolf. All right, let's take a look at our Gen Xers. Gen Xers are characterized as individualistic, technology, technologically adept, very flexible, and they value work-life balance. This is the generation that's called the me generation. They were the first group of latchkey kids who had to be independent because both sets of parents were working for the first time. They've seen their parents work very hard and get laid off. This is the generation that is loyal to the person and not the position. So they'll stay loyal to a person and not the position. So let's take a look at what was going on for them at when they were 10. And right now, I am describing my brother, by the way, whom I love dearly, but my brother and a little bit of my sister. Now, Elvis Presley dies, and this was in 1977. And a lot of you might be going, so really, how would that shape someone? This is a good example of not only could it shape you as the individual because of your experiences around it, but it's also about how people around you were experiencing these situations. Now, what I recall when Elvis Presley died, and I admit it, I'm not a huge Elvis Presley fan. I mean, I like his music, but I wasn't a woman that would be throwing my underwear on the stage to Elvis Presley. But there were people who were prostrate when he was that first musical icon, and he died way too young, that people were totally, and it was in the public's eye, it was on the news. And so as a 10-year-old, this individual may have been seeing how their parents were reacting to the death of Elvis Presley. In the same vein, you also had the 62 American hostages in Iran and how that played out in the public's eye and on the news. Mount St. Helens erupts in 1980. Then we have, just 3 years after Elvis Presley dies, John Lennon was killed in front of his Dakota apartments in 1980. On the good news, we had the first female Supreme Court justice, 1981. So we're starting to see things shift. Yeah, Robin's giving us the big hands up there. And the other thing we see is the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana. And again, some people might go, why was that a big stinking deal? It was an event that brought the entire globe together. People were getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning so that they could watch the wedding live. We had George Bush, the first one, elected in 1988. And then there was the Exxon Valdez tanker spill in 1989. And this was the start of what you saw a lot of environmentalist activists started happening, especially with the Exxon Valdez tanker spill. Well, now let's meet our Gen Xer, and her name is Laura. Laura was born in 1979, so she's 42. She is a registered nurse who works at the local hospital, specializing in pediatric care. She's recently married and has a 9-year-old daughter who was very active in school activities before the pandemic. Now, Laura is trying to balance work as a frontline healthcare worker, homeschooling, and everything else that you can imagine. When she was 10, one of the top movies of 1989 was When Harry Met Sally. One of the top TV shows was The Cosby Show. And Laura's a fan of the B-52s, so you can hear her singing Love Shack all the time. All right, let's wrap it up and talk about our millennials. Our millennials are characterized as being tech savvy, very family centric, very achievement oriented and team oriented, and many have described them as being attention craving. Now, I'd like you to think about school for just a moment, because this is the generation that did everything as a group project. They got participation ribbons for showing up. And before you judge, keep in mind the generation that raised them. So I have raised millennials. So if I have any beef with a millennial, I just need to look at my own parenting of the millennials. They, like the traditionalists, though, I do want to point out, witness the US being attacked on their home shores. They like to communicate in short bursts, texts, messenger, things of that nature. They'll never pick up the phone. I'm just talking about my kids now. They won't pick up the phone if you call them. Don't leave them a voicemail. They won't answer that. But if you send them a text, they're on it right away. All right, let's take a look at what was happening when the millennials were 10. And as you look at this list, you're going to see, unfortunately, a theme. We have Desert Storm in 1981. We have the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. The Unabomber was arrested in 1996. The death of Princess Diana. The Monica Lewinsky scandal. the Columbine High School shooting, the 9/11 attacks, and Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. So as you look at this, you see a theme that is tied to, I just likened it to violence, violence on our home shores, domestic terrorism, terrorism in general. And it was all being played out because this was in an era when the news was nonstop 24/7. So they were just saturated with all of this. So keep that in mind as we move on and meet our final committee member, Millennial Monica. And Millennial Monica was born in 1984. She is 38 years old and is the office manager bookkeeper for a property management company. She absolutely loves working there because it allows her the flexibility she needs with her growing family. She has 2 children and another on the way, and she's been able to work from home for the past 12 months, and has been juggling things quite well with homeschooling and everything else that she's needed to do. She's really hoping that her employer will allow her to continue to work from home even after her third child is born. Now, a fun fact for Monica, when she was 10, one of the top movies of 1994 was The Shawshank Redemption, and one of the top TV shows was Seinfeld. Now, before we move on, here's just another fun fact I want to share with you. All generations get irritated with a generation that they're not a part of. And the one thing that every generation has in common is they dislike the hair, the music, and the clothes of every other generation. So see, even though they have that in common, the traditionalists did not like the haircuts, the longer hair, the hippie hair. And then you move into the boomers, and they were looking at the Gen Xers where it was the mullet. And then you look at what was happening with millennials, where it might have been, especially with the guys up in our area, bleaching out their hair and different things. Every generation, those three things in common, that they had a tendency to judge the other generation about. So hair, clothes, and music. All right. So now that you have a picture of the makeup of the committee, someone from each of the generations, and a little bit about their background, we're going to eavesdrop on a portion of their meeting. And I really want you to listen carefully because you'll hear the generations at play. As you listen, consider what each person is really asking for and if their needs are being listened to and answered. Take it away, committee. Oh, we need to unmute our committee members. All right, so take it away.
Ladies. Okay, ladies, are we ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right, ladies, let's get started. I'm so happy we could finally meet in person now that we're under the modified phase. Zoom just was not working for me. By the way, Lucy couldn't be here for our lunch meeting today because it's her volunteer day at the senior center. She was so excited that the center opened back up and we did submit our declaration form to SIA. I went ahead and put together an agenda, so here's your copy. You can see that we are receiving a lot of new requests for our money and our time, and we need to talk about it if we'll be able to do all of those, along with all the projects that we've had to postpone due to the health restrictions in our community. Plus, I'm concerned about giving out too much money this year due to the pandemic and the fact that we couldn't do our big fundraiser.
Ethel, will we also be talking about moving our meetings to a different time? Because it's difficult for me to get away from the hospital, even during lunch. I don't have the flexibility with my schedule like everyone else does, especially with the added workload we have at the hospital now. Perhaps we could do some of our meetings via conference calls, since you said Zoom doesn't work for you. I think we can still accomplish a lot, even if we don't meet in person.
If we have time, we can discuss. But remember, ladies, when you signed up for the committee last year, you knew that we would always meet on the third Tuesday of the month at noon. That has been the standard for a number of years. We did a couple of those Zoom calls because we had to, but let's get back to normal. We all live in the same town, so it's ridiculous to have a meeting over the phone now. So let's just do a quick review of the projects and funding we do every year so we can start planning for the next club year. You can see on your agenda that we are looking for members to chair our park cleanup project, our senior center volunteer committee, and our annual Golden Party Tour.
Well, Ethel, I I think we should at least consider Laura's suggestion. We have lots of newer members who are in the same position that she's in. We're not all retired and can come and go as we please. I still want to participate after the baby comes, it's going to come any day now. And it will be a challenge for me to meet in person with a new baby. So I would like to see this added to our agenda under new business.
Fine. If we have time, Monica, we have a lot to discuss today.
Ethel, I would like to also have the committee review our involvement next year in the coordination of the senior center, the lunch services volunteers. It seems that for the last few years, those members who've had the time to volunteer aren't stepping up, and they are expecting our new members to take on this task. The majority of our new members work during the day, and it's difficult for them to get away. Monica's already brought this up as an issue, and we need to address this. And for the evening events, they have families to take care of. Our commitment to the senior center of 8 hours a week isn't working with the makeup of our club anymore.
Rachel, I know we've had challenges getting people to sign up for this in the past, and as a result, only a few people have been taking on the bulk of the work. That's where Lucy is today because no one else signed up to serve lunch on the first day we could do this again. We've been doing this project for 20 years and the senior center relies on us to do this. So we need to find a way to get more of our members in the club involved.
Ethel, I have to agree with Rachel. I volunteered quite a bit when I first joined a couple years ago, but my workload at the hospital has really picked up. And with trying to balance my daughter's blended schooling and activities, it's getting difficult for me to be away. The hospital supports our volunteer work, but not to the extent that I've had to do. When we were volunteering to serve lunch, we were not working from 12 to 1 like we used to. It's turned into an 11 to 1:30 shift. I would anticipate that now they are reopening, there will be more people to serve because they're also opening up the site for vaccines. With more people to serve, we actually need at least 4 people for each of the 3 days we work. We're giving more than our club commitment of 8 hours a week for this. The need has changed, and I don't think our club can continue to support the project at the level that they need.
I know I'm still considered the youngest and newest member of the club, and I joined because I like to be involved in a variety of projects that help the community. I was hoping that this club could finally explore doing the Dream It, Be It program, but I keep hearing that we don't have enough time to do that. Serving lunch at the senior center isn't my idea of fun, and I didn't think I would be required to sign up every single week. And quite frankly, I can't do it anymore, because I have young children. And so it's really hard. And maybe we need to look at either scaling back our commitment or look at partnering with another club in the area to help us with it. I would be happy to email some of my contacts and also do a volunteer request on Facebook to see what interest there is out there.
I have some extra time right now on my hands. I'd be willing to work with Monica on exploring the possibility of sharing the workload with another service organization.
Ladies, you're making my head spin with all of this talk about stopping our volunteer efforts to the senior center. You all don't understand. We made the commitment 20 years ago, and we need to honor that commitment. Monica, all of our projects don't have to be fun and enjoyable. Sometimes we just have to work and do things we don't like to do. Lucy isn't complaining about picking up extra shifts today at the senior center.
All right, well, let's give a big round of applause and a thank you to our Golden West region not ready for prime time players. Excellent job, and you have Emmys and Oscars are in your future. And I think the Method Acting Award goes to Carol for showing up pregnant with pictures of her kids. So great job, Carol, with that. Now, this was meant to be an exaggeration. However, in my Seroptimus travels, members have shared concerns that allowed me to create this hypothetical script. Now, did it sound familiar? You could probably substitute any meeting, any project, any members, and I'm sure everyone has experienced something similar during their time as a seroptimist. Ethel, Rachel, Monica, and Laura are all well-meaning and they have a passion for service. But could you imagine every time a member tries to bring up something new or suggest a change, how they would feel if they encountered this every single time? Would they be willing to serve in a leadership capacity if their perception of the club was that they're inflexible, they're not willing to meet their members where they're at today? So here's the deal, and admit it, each of us saw and heard a little bit of ourselves in this. I know when Ethel was talking, I could hear Ethel in my head and I could replay my own self saying a few of those things. And I'm not a traditionalist, but I could hear every single actor as they were playing their part going, oh my gosh, I think I have said that. I have done that. So here is the deal. Even though we each saw and heard a little bit ourselves in this, when generations collide, the real work doesn't get done. It doesn't get done at all, or if it does get done, it's at the risk of membership. Members will choose to leave if they're not feeling that their needs are fulfilled. So Robin, if you'll go ahead and go back to the slide deck, and we're on the next slide after this skip. But when generational differences get in the way, the real message isn't heard. And what I'd like you all to do is just go to your chat, and I want you to first think about Monica, Laura, and Rachel. So Ethel was the committee chair, but Monica, Laura, and Rachel. And I want you to share in chat, what do you think it was that they were trying to get across to Ethel? What was their message? What were they trying to share? And just take a few moments and put it in chat. And this is not intended to be a test of anybody's typing skills. So we're not spell checking anything. So I'm seeing a couple of direct messages coming into me, and I'll share those. Life balance was one that was coming up that was really important. Being flexible, service should be enjoyable, resistance to change. And so great. And let me just go back to a couple others here. I'm just kind of scrolling through. Times are changing and we need to be more flexible in order to recruit younger members. They're looking for another way to still be part of the club. Time to change with the times, and it's okay to change. Being flexible. So we're seeing a lot of commonality of flexibility. Now, I also want you to think about, now put this in Ethel's perspective. So I'm sure that Ethel, Sally, you played Ethel so well, by the way. I'm sure that Ethel was sitting here going, this is not the committee that I signed up to lead. You know, these three members are doing nothing but just hitting me right and left with all of their opposition to this project. So what do you think Ethel was hearing? It's not because of how it was being said, but what do you think Ethel was hearing? I saw a comment about the club should focus on, in her mind, traditional projects, things that they've had a commitment to. Let's see what else. Felt it was a lot of criticism. Ethel thought people were being lazy, like that. All she heard was whining. Yeah. You know, and after a while, you start to tune that out. So these are all great comments. And the important thing is, as we're thinking about this scenario, everybody had a role in it. So what a person's intent is, what they're sharing, what they're saying, may not be how it is perceived by the other person. So in all accounts, I think that Rachel, Laura, and Monica had positive intent. They were trying to help shift the club into a different focus. But the impact on Ethel was she was feeling attacked. And, you know, my head is spinning. We've got to move on. Now, here is where any one of them could have, they didn't know to do this, by the way, because it wasn't in the script. So this isn't on them. But any one of them could have said, can we take a pause for a moment? So here is your best practice. Here is your tip. When something like this is happening, just take a pause. Can we take a pause here for just a moment? And here is the most powerful question that you can ask anyone. I would have taken a pause and I would have gone to Ethel and I would have said, Ethel, what concerns you most about changing our focus on this project? What concerns you the most? Because then you're going to hear from Ethel what's important to her, because Ethel also needs to feel seen and heard and understood. And then at the same time, I might have turned around and said to Rachel, so Rachel, share with us your overarching concerns. How is this impacting the leadership in the club? You begin to shift. You begin to shift the focus of the conversation, because the focus of the conversation, it starts off with being serving lunch at the senior center, but what they're really trying to say is that, do we need to still do these projects in the same fashion that we were doing? Not once did you hear Rachel, Laura, or Monica say, let's quit the project altogether. It was, can we do it differently? Can we look at a different level of commitment? Can we involve others to do that? So I'm going to pause because there were a bunch of little messages. Sue Ellen, you said, how do you think we should do this? So share with me a little bit more what you mean with that question. And you'll have to take yourself off of mute. Or was that just a question that you said you would ask of Ethel? And Sally's kind of shaking her head that maybe that was just a question you'd ask of Ethel. Okay, cool.
Okay, yes, that was a question that I would have asked Ethel, because she has ideas too, and maybe that would have given her the time to share her ideas as well.
Excellent, excellent. Great question to ask. So not only are you asking what are her concerns, but you're also wanting her input on how could we do this differently? Because again, it's not about stopping it all together. It's about how can we be more effective in today's environment. Very cool. So again, great takeaway. Great question that Sue Ellen posed out there. How do you think we could or should do this differently? And then asking people what concerns them most about, or what's important to you with. So different ways to approach that question. Well, let's move on to the next little phase. And this is where y'all are going to have to do a little bit of work. So the handout has been loaded into chat. And so prior to today's session, it was actually yesterday, I did email the handout, and the questions are here on the screen. So if you haven't done this already, just quickly jot down, what generation are you a part of? Which characteristics most identify you, did you identify with? Because the second page of that handout had the characteristics. Where I really want you to focus on is jot down in your notes a time when you felt that you were not being seen, heard, or understood because of your generation or other ways that members may be identifying you. And then I also want you to jot down on the handout, what can you do to help everyone meet in the middle and move towards compromise? In other words, where are you willing to bend and be flexible? Because at the end of this is not about one generation having to acquiesce to the other. It's about compromise. It's about how can we come together and meet in the middle. So I'll be quiet for a couple of minutes just to give you an opportunity to jot down your thoughts on that handout. And again, the questions are on the screen in case you don't have the handout. And then we're going to have some group dialogue around this. I'll give you about one more minute just to gather your thoughts. So as we're getting ready to go into the next part, Robin's going to go ahead and take the slide deck down. So she'll stop presenting. That way we can put everybody, if you want to go and do gallery view, so that way you can see everybody. It'll make it a lot easier for when we're going to be doing some sharing here. Now, the one thing I do want to stress, though, as we're getting ready to have our conversations, is we're not going to solve the generational dilemma here within our final 10 minutes, but we can raise awareness and we can work towards taking a giant step towards meeting each other in the middle, because it's about having this type of dialogue where people can feel seen and heard and understood. So what I'd like to ask you to do, if you're comfortable sharing, and you can either use the old school raise the real hand, if I can get my hand in front of the camera correctly, or the reaction button, the raise hand. So you can do it that way, either way. If you have something to share from those two questions, and the two questions or the two asks of, was there a time when you felt that you weren't seen or heard or understood? And you felt a generational difference was at play, or if there's a suggestion you have to help people meet in the middle towards compromise. Just one of those things that you feel would benefit the rest of the group from hearing. So I will pause, and also you can put it into chat if you'd like, because I see that Secretary Pat has already done that as well. But go ahead, Carol, I see your hand up.
So I'm just going to give it really briefly, but when I was young and got out of college, I thought I knew it all. And I'd go to conferences and I'd dismiss what the older people said. And then I got older, and the new people went to conferences, the young people that just got out of school, got new jobs, and they thought they knew it all. And I was sitting there one day and I was like, wow, this is what I did to these, to the older people. And I realized what they're doing to me is what I did to the generation before me. So it was dismissing what they were saying, because I came out of school. I was educated. I knew everything. I was just fresh out of school. They didn't know anything. And, it's realizing that we all know different things and we all have different experiences, and we can all share those.
Thank you for sharing that, Carol. And sometimes that realization is hard, especially when all of a sudden you're looking in the mirror and you're going, oh, how many people did I irritate along the way? And how come nobody said anything to me if I was that much of an irritant, so to speak? So thank you for bringing that up, Carol, and your honesty. Jane Schaefer, I saw your hand go up. And so you have to, thank you.
Yep, I just wanted to share what had happened to me when I first joined our club and was introducing myself. I was talking about my work history, which happened to be very goal-oriented and work-centric. And I saw we had very few younger members than me, but there were a couple, and they were kind of rolling their eyes. And it was, I don't think in the moment I handled it well, but I think now I would have paused and said, tell me what you're thinking, or, share with me what you're feeling right now, instead of just kind of barreling on. I think that's one of the most powerful things we can do, is to ask open-ended questions when we see dissent or negative reactions.
Yeah. Jane, thank you for sharing that. And you're reminding too, it's that if we can just take a moment to take a breath, take that pause, ask the question instead of getting defensive. And it's easier said than done. I coach to this every day. I work with this every day. And yet I have my own hooks. I have my own, as soon as somebody says something, I'm like, oh, they did not just say that, or, oh boy, we're going to go toe to toe now, over this one. So we're all human. And so it's about grace and it's about positive intent. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat saying, I felt left out when I was new into Seroptimus. And so a lot of times, regardless of your generation, when you're new into the organization, because there's an established set of norms within the club, and now you're coming in with a whole different, perhaps, philosophy or thought process. And so it's, what can we do to make people feel welcomed, regardless of whatever the differences that there might be? LaDonna, I saw that your hand was up.
Yes, well, I see in one specific area in our club, I'm a boomer, and we have several traditionalists in our club because they've been around a long time and they are the motherships. They have that knowledge. But there's one area that is difficult personally for me, and I'm sure they know that no one works harder than I do because I'm passionate about Seroptimus, but it's like the start time for our meetings. They've always started in person at 7 o'clock. I am not a good morning person. And so I'm not at my best at 7 o'clock, which I loved being virtual because we started at 8:30. But it's a matter of the traditionalists and the boomers, and that's predominantly the different generations that we have. We have one Gen X, but that's where there's sometimes a struggle. And then I have people, some of the members coming to me and complaining about the start time, but then when we take it to a vote, it's overpowered back to the traditionalists.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be sympathetic to that because they have a reason why they want to start at 7 o'clock. And it's just hearing each other out.
Yeah. And that's a good point to bring up too, LaDonna. It's hearing each other out. And I want to draw your attention to, and Sally, thank you for this great comment in chat, that, one of the main personality traits of boomers is loyalty. And what I'll share is that this goes back to traditionalists are very loyal as well. But what they're loyal to is they're loyal to the process, the structure, the organization, whatever it was that was started, that's what they're loyal to. Because keep in mind that what they came from, that particular generation, they were not raised to question authority. Mm-hmm. So if the message comes down from upon high, whoever that is, that this is what you'll do, well, then I guess that's what we'll do. But now think about in today's environment where there's not necessarily some of those things that might be coming down from upon high are starting to rub against the grain. It's something that doesn't necessarily match the values of any of the generations. It may not match the values of a traditionalist. It may not match the values of a boomer, but yet you'll have some generations that will question. They'll go ahead and push back and they'll question. Whereas others, like perhaps a traditionalist, might say, you know what, maybe my time has come and gone. I don't want to deal with all these changes anymore. I'll tell you, that was the reason why my mother retired from banking. She said she was a fabulous career banker. I mean, rewarded, awarded, and everything. And she, all of a sudden, and she would have worked until she was 105. But at the age of 62, she picks up the phone and she calls me and she goes, Stephanie, I'm retiring. And I'm like, what? She goes, yeah, we just finished a computer conversion. They're getting ready to do another computer conversion. I'm done. She goes, I don't want to do another computer conversion. And so she opted to retire because she knew that there wasn't anything that she could say that was going to stop him from doing a computer conversion. Now, she was also in a position that she could retire, and do that. But what I'm sharing is that some people will leave the club and not tell you the real reason why they're leaving. If we don't take the time, LaDonna, your point was well taken. If we don't take the time to have those conversations, work towards meeting people in the middle. I'm not a fan of Zoom because I'm zoomed out. I have to do Zoom so much for work, Zoom for everything. And quite frankly, this is the first day in about a week I've been in full makeup because I'm kind of liking not having to put makeup on every day. But I did it for you all. So you're welcome, because otherwise it would not have looked well. I even kind of fixed the hair, and all that good stuff. But the point is it's people are at different places with everything that has been going on. So it's not about we have to completely stop and do something different, because there are people who love Zoom. Why not go blended? Why not look at, my club has actually had more attendance at Zoom meetings than we've had at our in-person meetings before the pandemic hit. And which is shocking to me because we had a very resistant to Zoom process, but they wanted the opportunity to connect. So the message overall for this is, oh, thank you, Sally, for telling me I look lovely. It's the lighting. We've got a lot of lighting going on here too. The message in all of this is that it takes work. None of us are perfect. Some of us will identify with characteristics that are not a part of the generation that we were born into, and that's okay. But it's about acknowledging that, and it's about being able to share that. It's about being able to share what's important to you, and it's also about asking people what's important to them. Because when you know that, it's easier to find a compromise to meet in the middle. I will share that I am loving your region. You guys are absolutely stinking amazing. And I would have used another word, but I'm really cutting back on my swearing these days because it's just not professional overall. But I love you guys. You're amazing. And I'll be with you tonight and tomorrow. But I'm always available for one-on-one conversations. And if you want to do it via Zoom, I'll put makeup on for you. We'll do it via Zoom, or you can pick up the phone and call me. So if there's anything that I can do to help your Seroptimus membership experience be better, I want to be that person for you, because I have loved my membership. There have been some bumps in the road. Everybody has had them, but I just want you to know that I'm here for you as well. So we've got a couple minutes left. And I will say, before they kick us out and make us go back to the main room, I'll just open it up for any other thoughts or comments that you all have. And you can put it in chat, or go ahead and do the raised hand or the reaction button so we can see what you got there. Oh, and Robin just said, forget it. You've got 56 seconds, head back to the next room. So why don't we go ahead and head back? Thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it. And I'm here for you.
Great job, Stephanie.
Thank you. My actresses were fabulous.
You were all fabulous.
Thank you.